We don't need your input, Stephen. She said it like I wasn't even sitting there, like the words coming out of my mouth were just background noise she needed to shut off. Her hand came up before I could finish my second sentence. That dismissive wave she'd perfected over the past 8 months. 15 people sat in that conference room, and not one of them looked me in the eye. They just waited for her to move on, waited for the meeting to continue like I hadn't spoken at all. My name is Stephen Walsh. I'm 48 years old, and before all this happened, I believed that good work spoke for itself. I had my notebook open in front of me, 3 bullet points about Titan manufacturing, about the warning signs I'd been tracking for 6 weeks. I closed it. The sound of that cover shutting was the loudest thing in that room. That was meeting number 11. I counted them, you see. Every time Patricia Moore interrupted me, every time she raised that hand, every time she talked over me like my voice was static on a radio she needed to tune out. 11 meetings where I'd tried to contribute. 11 times she'd made it clear my thoughts didn't matter. I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, where my dad worked the steel mills and my mom kept the family budget balanced on $32,000 a year. They taught me that if you did solid work, people noticed. They taught me that experience counted for something, that showing up every day and doing your job right was how you built a life worth living. I carried that belief through 8 years in the Navy, through my engineering degree at Ohio State, through every job I'd held since. I'm not the guy who makes waves, never have been. I'm the one who double-checks the calculations, who catches the details other people miss, who remembers when someone made a promise they didn't keep. I bite my thumbnail when I'm nervous, organize my desk when I'm anxious, and I remember things, small things, the way people phrase sentences when they're lying. The exact date someone said they'd get back to you but never did. I started at Summit Manufacturing Consulting 15 years ago as a junior analyst, fresh out of school with my engineering degree and a head full of ideas about how to make things run better. The company handled efficiency consulting for mid-size manufacturers across the Midwest. Nothing flashy, but important work that kept production lines running smooth and businesses profitable. We were the people companies called when their processes were broken and they couldn't figure out why. I was good at it. Better than good. Built a process optimization model in my second year that identified a bottleneck in automotive parts manufacturing that nobody else had caught. The client was losing $180,000 per quarter to downtime they couldn't explain. My model traced it back to a 47-second delay in their coding process that cascaded through the entire line. Fixed that one issue and saved them $2.8 million in the first quarter after implementation. Patricia Moore presented it to the board as a collective leadership achievement. I remember sitting at my desk that afternoon, eating my usual turkey sandwich and reading the internal memo that praised our strategic team for the breakthrough insight. The memo never mentioned my name, never mentioned the 60 hours I'd spent building that model, or the 3 weeks I'd spent on-site mapping every step of their process. I told myself it was fine. That's how companies work, right? Ideas flow up, credit spreads around. I was building my reputation through results, not recognition. The work mattered more than who got the credit. I made senior operations analyst 3 years later. Got my own office overlooking the employee parking lot, but it was mine. Had a window that actually opened. Had a door that closed when I needed to concentrate. Thought I was building something that mattered, something that would last. Patricia arrived 5 years ago. She was 37 then, MBA from Northwestern, 3 years in the industry, but talking like she'd been doing this for decades. Everyone called her Pat in those early days, said it with this casual familiarity that made her seem approachable. She had this way of asking questions that made you feel smart for knowing the answers, made you want to help her understand how things really worked. She wore sharp suits and laughed at the right moments in meetings. Always seemed to know exactly what to say to make people comfortable. She'd remember personal details about your family, ask about your kid's soccer season, mention that vacation you'd taken last summer, made you feel seen. In my first 2 years under her leadership, she'd nod when I spoke. She'd say things like, "Good observation, Stephen," or "Let's dig into that further." She never used my name when she repeated my ideas to others, but she acknowledged me in the moment. That felt like enough. I wasn't looking for spotlight time. I just wanted to do the work, solve the problems, help the clients. She got promoted to CEO 18 months ago. Big ceremony, Board announcement, company-wide email about exciting new leadership and fresh perspectives. Everyone seemed happy about it. She was one of us, had come up through the ranks, understood the business from the ground up. Things shifted about 8 months after her promotion. Small changes at first, so subtle you'd miss them if you weren't paying attention. And I was always paying attention. She'd check her phone when I presented quarterly findings. She'd redirect conversations before I finished making my points. Then the interruptions got sharper, more cutting. By month 4, she wasn't even pretending to listen. She'd raise that hand and say things like, "Let's stay focused here," or "We're losing the thread," even when I was directly addressing the exact agenda item we were supposed to be discussing. Other people started following her lead. Once Patricia made it acceptable to cut me off, others joined in. Andrew Kelly, this outside consultant she'd brought in from her previous company, would actually start talking over me mid-sentence. Just turn to whoever was sitting next to him and launch into some story about his weekend while I was trying to explain a supply chain vulnerability. Jennifer Wilson from the senior team would shuffle her papers and look away whenever I spoke. Daniel Thompson, who'd been my cubicle neighbor for 6 years before we both got offices, would pull out his phone and start scrolling like I'd become invisible. These were people I'd worked with for years, people who'd asked for my help on their own projects, people who knew I knew what I was talking about. But once Patricia decided my voice didn't matter, theirs followed like dominoes falling in a line. I started documenting every meeting, every interruption, the date, the topic, who was present, what I'd been trying to say when she cut me off. I didn't know what I'd do with the information. I just knew I needed to remember it correctly. Needed proof that I wasn't imagining it, that this was really happening and I wasn't just being oversensitive. Meeting number 8 was about budget allocations for the third quarter. I tried to suggest reallocating $45,000 from the underperforming client acquisition budget to process improvement initiatives. Had the numbers to back it up, had examples from previous quarters where similar moves had paid off. Patricia let me get through one sentence before she turned to Andrew and asked what he thought about client acquisition strategies instead. Meeting number 9 was the quarterly review prep. I mentioned we should address the growing concerns from Titan Manufacturing about our response times. Patricia interrupted me to ask Jennifer about scheduling the board presentation. Meeting number 10 was a project status update. I tried to raise concerns about resource allocation on the Morrison account. Patricia actually laughed and said, "Stephen, we've got this handled." Then came meeting number 11. Tuesday morning, full strategy session, all department heads, plus 2 board advisors who usually didn't attend these sessions. I'd been tracking something for 7 weeks by then. Something important. Titan Manufacturing, one of our oldest partners, a company we'd worked with for 14 years, was changing. Not dramatically, not in ways that most people would notice, but I'd been watching the patterns. Small shifts in how they communicated with us. Their CEO, Richard Morrison, had been elected to the National Manufacturing Advisory Board 3 months earlier. The kind of position that changes how people see themselves and their priorities. I'd noticed them pulling back from 4 collaborative projects over the past 6 weeks, citing capacity constraints each time. Their emails had gotten more formal, more distant. Response times had increased from an average of 4.2 hours to 11.7 hours. Meeting confirmations that used to come the same day were now taking 3 to 4 days. I knew what it meant. They were repositioning themselves, getting more selective about partnerships. We weren't going to be their priority partner anymore. And if we didn't adjust our approach soon, if we didn't acknowledge this shift and adapt to it, we'd lose them completely. That kind of loss would hurt. They represented 22% of our annual revenue, $1.8 million in billings. More than that, they were a reference account, the kind of client other manufacturers look to when deciding who to work with. I tried to bring it up in meeting 11. Had my notebook open, my data ready, clear bullet points about what I'd observed and what it meant. Got halfway through my first sentence before Patricia raised her hand. "Let's focus on real concerns here," she said. Then she actually laughed. Not a polite meeting laugh, a dismissive one, like the idea of me having insight worth hearing was genuinely funny to her. Someone coughed. Jennifer shifted her papers. Daniel stared at his laptop screen like it contained the secrets of the universe. I closed my notebook and didn't open it again for the rest of that meeting. That night I went home to my apartment and made coffee I didn't drink. My kids were at their mom's house for the week. It was her custody week. So the place was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of traffic outside. I sat on my couch with my laptop and started searching. I pulled up Patricia's background file from the company archives, the one from her hiring process 5 years ago. Standard information at first: education, work history, references from previous employers. But I kept digging deeper. Old interviews in industry magazines, conference speaker profiles, professional association memberships. That's when I found it. An article Patricia had written 6 years ago for Manufacturing Leadership Quarterly about mentorship in the industry. She'd mentioned someone who'd influenced her career early on, called her a role model, the woman who believed in my potential when others saw only inexperience. Helen Davis. I recognized the name immediately from the company directory. Helen had been our board chairwoman until 3 years ago when she'd stepped down to emeritus status. Still attended quarterly meetings, still held significant influence, but wasn't involved in day-to-day operations anymore. I found more references. A photo of them together at an industry dinner 5 years back, Patricia looking at Helen with something close to reverence in her expression. A quote in another article where Patricia called Helen my professional North Star. A LinkedIn recommendation Helen had written for Patricia that used words like exceptional leadership potential and strategic vision. This wasn't just professional respect, this was mentor worship. The kind of relationship that shapes everything about how someone sees themselves in the business world. I'd spent 15 years learning how to spot patterns, how to understand the relationships that really mattered in corporate environments, how the official org chart never told you where the real power lived, how influence flowed through personal connections more than formal positions. And sitting there on my couch at 11:30 p.m., I realized I'd found the one relationship that mattered more to Patricia than anything else in her professional life. The woman whose approval had launched Patricia's career, whose opinion could end it just as easily. I didn't have a plan yet, but I had a thread. And I knew how to pull threads carefully, how to follow them to their source without breaking them too soon. Helen Davis kept office hours on Tuesdays and Thursdays even though she wasn't running anything anymore. Old habits, I figured. Or maybe she just didn't know what else to do with her time after 30 years of building Summit from a 12-person operation into a 200-employee consulting firm. I spent a week writing the email, deleted it 5 times, started over each time. I needed a reason to reach out that felt legitimate, that wouldn't raise suspicion if word got back to Patricia. I couldn't just show up asking about mentorship relationships or company politics. I settled on the company's upcoming 25th anniversary. Someone in communications had mentioned doing a historical feature for the company newsletter, maybe some client testimonials about long-term partnerships. Perfect cover story. I wrote to Helen's assistant, she still had one, part of the emeritus package, and said I was gathering background on the evolution of client relationships for the anniversary project. Would Ms. Davis be willing to share some historical perspective over coffee? Her assistant replied within 2 hours. Helen would be happy to meet. How was Tuesday at 10 a.m.? I showed up 5 minutes early to Java Junction, a coffee shop 3 blocks from headquarters, somewhere I'd never been before. Didn't want to risk running into anyone from work, didn't want questions about who I was meeting or why. Helen arrived exactly on time, and the first thing I noticed was how she carried herself. Steady, unhurried, like someone who'd never had to rush for anyone else's schedule. She was 68 years old. I'd looked that up. With silver hair and practical shoes, eyes that stayed focused on your face when you talked. "Stephen," she said, like she'd been saying my name for years. "I've heard good things about your work." I wondered if that was true or just something people said. "Thank you. I appreciate you making time for this." We talked for 45 minutes that first meeting. I asked about the early days of Summit, about how client relationships were different back then when business was done on handshakes and people knew each other's families. She told stories about flying to Detroit to meet potential partners in person, about contracts written on napkins that lasted for decades. She asked what I did, and I explained my role simply: analysis, forecasting, relationship monitoring, looking for patterns that might indicate changes in partnership dynamics. That's valuable work, she said. Not glamorous, but essential. Most people don't understand how much of business success depends on reading the subtle signals. Most essential things aren't glamorous, I said. She smiled at that. A real one, not the kind people use in business settings. You're absolutely right about that. I didn't mention Patricia, didn't mention being silenced or dismissed or erased from conversations. I just talked about the work, asked thoughtful questions about Summit's history, and thanked her for her time. When we parted, she said to reach out if I had more questions for the anniversary project. I said I would. I waited 3 weeks before emailing again. In those 3 weeks, Patricia cut me off in 2 more meetings, numbers 12 and 13, and yes, I was still counting every single one. Meeting 12 was about budget allocations for the Morrison project. I tried to suggest reallocating resources from what was clearly a failing initiative. Patricia literally started talking to Andrew about his weekend plans while I was mid-sentence. Just turned her whole body away from me and asked him about some restaurant he'd mentioned trying. I stopped talking, closed my laptop. Nobody noticed. Meeting 13 was worse because I'd almost convinced myself things were improving. I'd prepared a comprehensive presentation on supply chain vulnerabilities across our client base, spent 6 hours building the analysis, double-checking every data point. Patricia let me get through 4 slides before she stood up and said we needed to table this for another time. The meeting wasn't even half over. We just moved on to someone else's update while my presentation stayed frozen on the screen behind me, all that work dismissed with a wave of her hand. My second coffee with Helen happened at the same place. I'd sent her a follow-up question about partnership evolution, about how companies in the 1990s knew when long-term relationships were shifting before digital communication made everything faster but somehow less personal. She suggested we meet again, and this time we talked for over an hour. I told her I'd been studying how communication patterns changed when partnerships weakened, how language evolved from collaborative to transactional, how response times indicated shifting priorities. You're looking at behavior, not just contracts, she said. Contracts tell you what people agreed to once, I replied. Behavior tells you what they're choosing now. She nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something she'd been thinking about. Have you noticed any concerning patterns in our current partnerships? I had. Of course I had. I'd been tracking them for months, but I kept my answer measured, professional. A few interesting developments. Nothing critical yet, but worth monitoring closely. Send me your observations, she said. I'd be curious to see what you're noticing that others might be missing. I sent her a 3-page analysis that night, carefully worded, professional tone throughout. I focused on 4 partnerships, including Titan Manufacturing. I didn't frame it as warnings or urgent concerns, just presented the data cleanly. Response time increases, language formality changes, meeting cancellation patterns, project withdrawal trends. Let the numbers tell their own story, Helen replied the next morning. This is excellent work, Stephen. Exactly the kind of strategic thinking that built this company. Let's discuss it next week. We fell into a rhythm after that. Coffee every 2 to 3 weeks, always brief, always professional. I never complained about Patricia, never mentioned the meetings where I was systematically silenced. I just talked about the work, about patterns and relationships, about the small signals that most people missed, but that could predict major changes months in advance. Helen asked smart questions. She'd referenced something I'd mentioned in a previous conversation, showing she'd been thinking about it between our meetings. During our 4th coffee, she told me about her early career, about a boss who'd never listened to her warnings until it was too late. I tried to tell him about a client relationship that was deteriorating, Helen said quietly. But some people can't hear feedback until the consequences are already happening. I drank my coffee and said nothing, but I filed that story away. Helen understood what it felt like to be unheard, to watch problems develop that could have been prevented if someone had just listened. Work got progressively worse. Patricia brought Andrew in as a full-time senior consultant, gave him an office 2 doors down from mine. He sat in every strategy meeting now, and she asked his opinion on everything. Actually turned to him and said, "What do you think, Andrew?" Like his 6 weeks with our company made him more valuable than those of us who'd been there for decades. In meeting 16, I tried to correct an error in Andrew's quarterly forecast. The manufacturing sector projections he'd cited were wrong, not opinion wrong, mathematically wrong. His numbers showed 12% growth when every industry report indicated 4-6% maximum. I said it as diplomatically as I could. I think there might be a calculation error in those projections. Patricia didn't even look at me. Andrew's methodology is solid. Let's move forward with his recommendation. Those incorrect numbers went into our quarterly client report. I had to watch it happen, knowing it was wrong, knowing it would damage our credibility when clients compared our projections to reality 6 months later. I stopped eating lunch with colleagues, stopped joining them for coffee breaks or Friday afternoon conversations. I came in early, stayed late, kept my head down and focused on the work. Jennifer asked me once if everything was okay. I said it was fine. She didn't ask again. At home, I lived quietly. Had my kids every other week. Emma, 16, and Jake, 14. And those were the good weeks. They'd tell me about school projects and friend drama, and I'd listen and ask questions and remember what it felt like when people valued what you had to say. My fifth coffee with Helen happened on a cold Thursday in February. We sat by the window watching people hurry past in heavy coats, everyone focused on getting where they needed to go. I mentioned Titan Manufacturing again, the partnership I'd been tracking for months. Their CEO was just announced as the new chairman of the Industry Standards Committee, I said. They're positioning themselves more selectively now. We should be thoughtful about that relationship, Helen said, watching my face carefully. Have you been able to discuss this in strategy meetings? The words came out quieter than I'd intended. I've tried to mention it several times, but the conversations tend to get redirected before I can finish the analysis. She looked at me for a long moment. Not with pity, not with surprise, with understanding. Send me your complete analysis, she said. All of it. I did. 4 pages this time, detailed timeline of communication changes, data on engagement patterns, projections of where this relationship was heading if we didn't adjust our approach. I didn't mention Patricia's dismissiveness or the meeting where she'd laughed at me, just presented the facts and let them speak. Helen called me the next day. Not emailed, called. This is critical strategic work, she said. I'm sharing it with the board. They need to understand what's happening. Thank you, I said. No, she replied. Thank you for trusting me with this. 2 weeks passed. I heard through Jennifer that Helen had been making calls, asking questions about client relationships, requesting updated partnership data. Patricia didn't seem concerned. Why would she be? Helen was emeritus, a symbolic figure who showed up to quarterly meetings and generally supported leadership decisions. Patricia didn't know Helen had been having coffee with me for 4 months, didn't know I'd been sending detailed analysis directly to her, didn't know that the woman whose approval had launched her career was now watching her with different eyes. I came in early the morning of the quarterly board review, full leadership team, all department heads, plus several board members who usually participated remotely. I'd stopped preparing presentations months ago, stopped hoping my voice would matter. I brought my notebook and planned to sit quietly, same as always. I was getting coffee from the break room when I saw Helen in the lobby standing near the reception desk in her coat. My heart rate spiked. She wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't a formal board meeting. This was internal strategy review. She saw me and nodded slightly. I nodded back and headed to the conference room. The meeting started normally. Budget updates, project reviews, standard quarterly business. Then we reached partnership assessments. Patricia stood up. She always stood when presenting. Loved the authority it gave her. Our client relationships remain extremely strong, she began confidently. In fact, I'd say we're in the best position we've been in years. She pulled up her standard slide showing our top 6 partners. Titan Manufacturing was listed second, their logo prominently displayed. Patricia pointed at it and smiled broadly. This partnership has been particularly solid. Richard Morrison calls me personally to check in on projects. They're eager to maintain our relationship at current levels. A few people murmured approval. Patricia fed off the positive energy, got more animated. Honestly, they'll accept whatever terms we propose. They need us more than we need them at this point. Then she did something that made my stomach clench. She changed her voice, made it higher and more formal, mimicking Richard Morrison's slight southern accent. Whatever works best for Summit, Patricia. We're so grateful for your leadership, Patricia. Laughter around the room. Jennifer was grinning. Andrew nodded like this was brilliant relationship management. Helen cleared her throat from the back corner, not loud, just enough. Patricia stopped mid-gesture, turned, saw Helen sitting there with her hands folded, watching everything. The color drained from Patricia's face like someone had opened a valve. Helen, Patricia said, her voice suddenly thin. I didn't know you'd be joining us today. I wanted to observe, Helen said calmly. Please continue. Patricia tried to recover. I was just explaining our strong partnership portfolio. Yes, Helen said. I heard you mention that company whose CEO is so eager for your business. The one you were imitating. It was just, we have an excellent working relationship. Helen stood up slowly. That's interesting. Because Richard Morrison serves on the Industry Standards Committee with me. We had lunch together yesterday. Complete silence. The kind where everyone stops breathing. He mentioned they've been reevaluating their consulting partnerships, said they want to work with firms that demonstrate professionalism and mutual respect. Patricia gripped the podium. Helen, I think there might be some misunderstanding. I don't think so. Helen's voice stayed calm, measured. I received a detailed analysis months ago predicting exactly this kind of partnership decline. It was thorough, accurate, and completely ignored. She paused, looking directly at Patricia. Instead of addressing those concerns, you mocked the client in front of your team. Patricia's eyes found mine across the room. Real recognition this time, understanding flooding her face along with something that looked like betrayal. Helen walked toward the door, then stopped. The analysis was exceptional strategic work, exactly what this company should be listening to. The door closed behind her with a soft click. 72 hours later, Patricia submitted her resignation. I'm still at Summit, still a senior operations analyst, still in my office overlooking the parking lot. But when I speak now, people listen. When I share analysis, it gets read and acted upon. When I walk into meetings, I don't brace myself for dismissal. Helen and I still have coffee occasionally. Last time, she asked how I was doing. Better, I told her. Much better, she smiled. Your voice matters, Stephen. It always did. That's the truth about being heard. Sometimes you have to find the right listener.